Okay, what is up there, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have another video related to World War I and Austria-Hungary, or the former kingdom or empire of Austria-Hungary, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this video has to do with one of the lesser known topics, or at least one of the topics that isn't really mentioned that much when it comes to the Austro-Hungarian armed forces in the First World War, and that is the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. Now, the Austro-Hungarian Navy, also known as the KUK Mariner, is usually mentioned when it comes to World War I naval warfare, but many do not talk about the ships and vessels that made up the river flotillas of the Austro-Hungarian Navy that operated on the mainland. These are warships and vessels and combat vessels that operated largely on the Danube River and many other smaller rivers that lined the Kingdom of Austria-Hungary. These included large monitors, patrol boats, and some one-off experimental vessels that made up the empire's inland navy. So let's go over some or all of the known classes of river patrol boats and armored monitors, monitor warships that made up the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. And first we're going to start off with the monitor class of warships that served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. And the first class of monitors were the Elita class of monitors that were constructed in 1870 through 1872. And these were the first heavy warships to serve in the Austro-Hungarian River Navy on the Danube River. This class consisted of two ships, the SMS Elita and the SMS Moros. Both vessels weighed about 310 to 350 tons, and they were powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum of 700 horsepower or combined horsepower, and they were fueled by basic coal, just like most other vessels that were constructed in the late 19th century. The vessels had a speed of just 8 knots. Their armor thickness was between 25 and 44 millimeters, 50 millimeters later on in 1893 when these ships were reconstructed, and their main armament was two 149mm 18 caliber or Skoda main gun, also known as the Skoda L-21-M61 or 1861 main gun. These were later upgraded in the year of 1893 to one 120mm 33 caliber Skoda L-35-80 main gun. Their secondary armament were two 47mm 40 caliber Skoda quick firing main guns, also known as the L-44 model of main gun, and they also had one or two 8mm Swarless machine guns. Each vessel had a crew of between 50 and 59 sailors, and these ships served all the way up until the year of 1921, from 1872 until 1921, and they were the first of the heavy warships to enter the Austro-Hungarian River Navy on the Danube River. They also served on some of the smaller rivers like the Mor, Ipo, and Tisa rivers, Tisa, Drava, and later Drina rivers during the First World War. These were some of the first vessels to go into combat against the Serbian river flotilla or river navy during the first year of World War I, between 1914 and 1915, and they actually managed to survive the war pretty much intact. Now, back in the year of 1893 to 1896, these vessels were actually modernized to the late 19th century standard. So they were some of the older vessels that were later modernized for the late 19th and early 20th century. But they were the oldest vessels in the Austro-Hungarian River Navy, and they actually managed to survive the First World War. Now, after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918, these vessels were given to both Austria and Hungary. They were divided, and both ships survived for a few years. But in 1921, the SMS Moros was sold for scrap, but the SMS Elita was rebuilt into a dredger, or a harbor dredger, for the Hungarian fleet in the 1920s. And she actually managed to survive in this state for many decades. She was still around during the Second World War, during the time of Miklas Horthy's reign of power in Hungary during the Second World War. Later on, Hungary became a communist country, and she entered service in the Hungarian Soviet Navy, surviving all the way up until the 21st century. In 2006, the SMS Elita was rediscovered and went through a dramatic makeover where she was restored back to her original configuration. And today you can actually see the SMS Elita today in the port of Budapest as one of the last remaining Austro-Hungarian warships left anywhere in Europe. And that's basically it for the Elita class of heavy river monitor of the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. And so that brings us to the next class of river monitor, that is the Koras class of river monitors that were constructed between 1891 and 1892. This class consisted of two vessels, the SMS Koras and her sister ship, the SMS Samos, or Sasmos, and these two vessels were constructed in Újpest, Austria-Hungary. Both vessels had a displacement of between 440 and 448 tons. They were powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum horsepower of 1,200 horsepower. Their maximum speed was 10 knots. They were cold powered, just like most, if not all, late 19th century warships. And they had an armor thickness of between 19 and 75 millimeters of armor protection. Their main armament were two 120 millimeter Skoda G35 main guns, or GL35 main guns. They also had two 66mm Skoda quick-firing main guns, or Skoda L42 main guns, and two 8mm Swarlos machine guns. They had a crew of 72, and they entered service in the year of 1892 as the second class of heavy river monitor to serve in the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. Just like the Elita class, these vessels also served until after the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with the Koras, or SMS Koras, being given to the state of Yugoslavia in 1919, where she was renamed the Yugoslav Monitor Morava. Morava would serve in the Second World War during the German and Axis invasion of Yugoslavia in 1941, and she would serve all the way until she was sunk in combat in the year of 1945. Her sister ship Sasmos would serve all the way up until 1921, where she was converted into a dredger, and she would serve in that capacity for a few decades until she was scrapped sometime in the 1930s. Now, the Koras class of river monitor became the standard blueprint for all future Austro-Hungarian river monitors that were produced after the year of 1892. And that basically ends the history of the Koras class of river monitor of the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. The next class of monitor is the Teams class. And the Teams class were constructed between the years of 1903 and 1904. These were the first Austro-Hungarian monitors to be manufactured in the early 20th century. The class consisted of two ships, the SMS Teams and her sister ship, the SMS Badrag. Both ships were completed and entered service in the year of 1904, and they would serve all the way up until 1918. The vessels had a displacement of between 442 to 470 tons, and a maximum displacement during the First World War of between 486 tons all the way up to 520 tons. They were powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum horsepower of 1,400 horsepower. Their speeds were between 13, their maximum speed was 13 knots, and they had a maximum range of 500 nautical miles. The armor thickness was between 25 and 75 millimeters, and they had a maximum crew of 86 to 89. The main armament were two 120mm Skoda L35-K104 main guns, and they also had one 120mm howitzer, or Skoda howitzer model L10 howitzer. They were also armed with two 37mm quick-firing main guns, or single-shot main guns, and three 8mm Swarlos heavy machine guns. Later on, their secondary armament was upgraded to two 90mm Skoda L45 main guns, and two 47mm Skoda L44 main guns, or secondary guns. They also had two 8mm Swarlos machine guns again. Their machine gun capacity was downgraded to just two Swalos machine guns. Now, during the First World War, it was the SMS Duna herself that fired the first shot of World War I against Serbia during the first two major campaigns along the Danube River in the year of 1914, between July and August of 1914. So SMS Duna is the one who fired the first shot of World War I. Later on, in October of 1914, the SMS Teams was sunk after she struck a naval mine placed in the river by the Serb Navy. This happened in the area known as Sabark on the Sava River. She was later raised in June of 1916 and was put back into service by July of 1917. SMS Duna herself later ran aground in October of 1918 in the Vinista River. Later on, after World War I, she was refloated and taken into service by the newly formed Navy of Yugoslavia. SMS Teams was later interred by the post-war Austrian-Hungarian Navy, and she was later transferred to Yugoslavia and was renamed the Yugoslav Monitor Sava, later renamed again to the Drina, and then transferred to Romania after World War I, where she served all the way up to the end of World War II in 1945. SMS Duna would serve in the Yugoslav Navy for many decades. In fact, she wasn't decommissioned until the 1950s. Afterwards, she stayed in storage or dry dock for many decades again until the collapse of Yugoslavia. Later on, she ended up in Serbia in the 1990s and early 2000s, and then finally in the 2010s, in the year of 2015, she was rediscovered and was later restored as a museum ship in Serbia. In fact, you can see the fully restored SMS Duna, known in Serbia as the Sava, today at the main Serbian naval base on the Sava River in Serbia. And she is also one of the last Austro-Hungarian warships still around in this modern 21st century. And that pretty much ends the history of the Teams class of River Monitor of the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. The next class of Austrian monitors were the Enns class monitors, constructed between the years of 1913 and 1914. This class consisted of two monitors, the SMS Enns, ENNS, and the SMS INN. These two vessels had a maximum displacement of 537 tons, or 536 tons. They were powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum of 1,500 horsepower. Their maximum speed was 13 knots, and their maximum range or endurance was 700 nautical miles. Their armor thickness was between 25 and 50 millimeters, and they had a main armament of two 120 millimeter Skoda 42-L45 main guns, and a secondary armament of three 120mm Skoda L10 howitzers. They also had two 66mm Skoda L50 secondary or third line main guns, and they also had six 8mm Swalos machine guns. Their crew capacity was 95, and these vessels would serve in the Austro-Hungarian River Navy until the year of 1918. Now, during the First World War, in the year of September 1917, the SMS Enns was sunk in the lower Barilla region of the Danube River by a naval mine, placed there by either the Serbs or the Allied powers. Later on, she was salvaged in Hungary, where she remained until the end of the war, and then she was pressed into service by the newly formed Hungarian Soviet Republic. Later on, there was a major conflict between the Hungarian Soviet Republic and Romania, and she was temporarily captured by the Romanians at the end of that conflict after the Romanians defeated the Soviet-Hungarian forces. Later on, she was given to Yugoslavia in the year of 1919. She was given to the Yugoslavians temporarily before being given back to the Romanians in 1920, where she would serve in the Romanian Navy as the Romanian Monitor Basarabia from the year 1920 until at least 1944-1945, at the end of World War II. Afterwards, she was scrapped by the Romanians during the Cold War. SMS Enns herself would later end up in the Yugoslav Navy in 1918, where she was renamed the Yugoslav Monitor Drava, serving all the way up until 1941, where she was scuttled by her crew during the invasion of Yugoslavia by the Axis powers in April of 1941, thus ending the history of the Enns class of Austro-Hungarian River Monitor. The next class of Austro-Hungarian River Monitor is the Sava class of monitors that were constructed between 1914 and 1915 and entering service in the same year of 1915. This class consisted of two vessels, the Teams 2 and the SMS Sava. The SMS Teams 2 was renamed the SMS Duna in the year of 1917. These two vessels had a maximum displacement of 580 tons. They were powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum horsepower of 1,750 horsepower. Their speed was 13.5 knots, and they had a maximum endurance of 700 nautical miles. Their armor thickness was between 25 and 50 millimeters, and they had a main armament of two 120 millimeter Skoda G/L45 main guns and two 120 millimeter Skoda L10 howitzers. They were also armed with two 66mm L26 third-line main guns and two 47mm quick-firing Skoda main guns, L44 main guns, along with seven 8mm Swolos machine guns. Their crew capacity was 91, and they would serve all the way up until the year of 1918 at the end of World War I. At the end of the First World War, they were later transferred to the Yugoslav Danube Flotilla, or the Yugoslav River Navy, in the post-war era of late 1918, early 1919. Now, the Sava herself was later transferred to Romania, where she was renamed Bukovina in 1918 to 1919, and her sister ship Bosna was later transferred to Yugoslavia, where she was renamed the Yugoslav Monitor Vardar in the year of 1919 and 1920, and both ships would serve all the way up until the Second World War. In 1941, the Yugoslav Monitor Vardar was later scuttled during the invasion of Yugoslavia by the Axis powers, and the Romanian Monitor Bukovina would serve until the end of the Second World War, where she was later scrapped during the Cold War. And that basically ends the history of the Sava class of river monitors that served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. The final class of heavy river monitor to be constructed for the Austro-Hungarian Navy was the Duna class of monitor that were constructed between 1917 and 1918. But unlike the other vessels on this list, they were never completed and were scrapped after World War I. These vessels would have been the largest river monitors to serve in any navy at that time. Their displacement was to be 1,240 tons, and they were to be powered by two vertical triple expansion steam engines with a maximum horsepower of 2,100 horsepower. Their speed would have been 10 knots, and their crew capacity would have been at least 150. The main armament was to be two 190mm Skoda L45-K18 main guns and two 90mm Skoda L45K-16 secondary guns. They were also to be armed with one Skoda 90mm L45 third line main gun and four 37mm Skoda Model 1900 quick firing autocannons. Both ships were laid down in 1917, but they were never completed before the end of the war in late 1918. After World War I, these two vessels were scrapped while uncompleted or incompleted, and that basically ends the history of these two vessels. Now, the vessels were to be named the SMS Duna and the SMS Tiza, after the Duna and Tiza rivers that flew through Austria-Hungary at the time. But neither vessel was completed before the end of World War I, and they were scrapped while they were still incompleted, thus ending the history of the Duna class of potential heavy river monitor from 1917-1918. And that basically ends it for the larger river monitors that served in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. Now, in the next video, I will cover some of the river patrol boats. These are large and small river patrol boats that were constructed between the years of 1900 and 1918. And these vessels served in the Austro-Hungarian river flotilla, largely based on the Danube River from 1900 until 1918, with many of those vessels also serving in the post-war Hungarian and Austrian and Yugoslav navies during the interwar years and during the Second World War, with a few of those vessels still surviving to this day, either as museum ships or having been rebuilt as other vessels, like sightseeing vessels or touring vessels in current modern-day Austria and Hungary, and also in the former Baltic states of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the modern states of Croatia, Slovenia, and Montenegro, and also Kosovo. So see you guys in the next video when I cover the Austro-Hungarian armored river patrol boats and gunboats, which are the smaller vessels that served in the Austro-Hungarian River Navy. So what do you all think of this? Please tell me in the comments section below, and until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.